Welcome to this episode of the Heartbeat for Hire podcast. I feature Olympians, CEOs, disruptors, authors, professional athletes, and the best of the best, where they share their stories of resilience with my lens on leadership and culture. Let's get started. Greetings and welcome to this episode of the Heartbeat for Hire podcast. You know, I only bring you the best, and today is a good one. 3 things you're going to learn in this episode. Number 1, what the best companies to do to unlock rapid growth. Number 2, why a culture of authenticity, imagination, and generosity can drive extraordinary results. And number 3, why everyone needs to love their weird. Frankie Russo is one of the top 50 global thought leaders in growth, former Fortune 500 Chief Innovation Officer, a 2-time best-selling author, and an 8-time Inc. 500 founder/entrepreneur. His sweet spot is unlocking rapid growth and competitive advantage. His keynotes and masterclass experiences show you how to foster and build a culture of authenticity, something you know we love here, imagination, and generosity to unlock breakthrough results, extraordinary transformation to keep growth going. He's also a great husband and dad to 6 beautiful children. Frankie, welcome to the show.
Wow, that was awesome. Now I can't wait to hear what I have to say.
I'll make it easy for you.
Who is that guy? I was like, I forgot they wrote that bio.
He's an impressive dude.
Yeah, that was pretty good.
So I start every show the same, and the first thing I always ask my guests is, would you share a little bit of your story?
Okay. Wow. The older you get, the longer winded that becomes. So I'll try to do the quick version. I grew up with running homeless shelters with my parents. And so we were in inner city mission work for those years, got away from that and got way away from that and got into drugs and alcohol in my 20s, started my first company, which happened to be in a mortgage company in the mortgage, well, right before the mortgage crisis. Not that I knew any of that, because obviously I was a 20-year-old thinking that I knew everything, but clearly knew nothing. That's what 20s are all about. And then after going through a really big bottom between marriage crisis and losing the company and walking to work for a year and having to get sober from drugs and alcohol, I then started rebuilding a different kind of business. And that business was a make-believe business. And what we did is we made the clients believe that we had a great business, and then we turned around and made the community believe in the client's product and services and that they were wonderful. Nowadays, they just call it branding. But back then, that was kind of the wild idea I had. Because after I lost my first company and got sober and had to really get honest about what am I even good at? And it wasn't good CEO or good business leader, or good HR manager, or good at putting stuff together like that. It was really just that the one thing we did really well was make people believe in us. And so that's when I was like, all right, well, I guess that's what I'm good at. So that's where the make-believe company came from. I did it with my little brother. It was called Potenza. It was Italian for power, and we helped empower companies. A lot of it was growth. Back then, it was about more of one sector of what I really focus on, which is I call promotions, which would be, marketing, branding, positioning, advertising, sales, that kind of stuff. And then today, I've moved into a different space after having built another company after Potenza, which had some really great success. We had 60x growth in 3 years, and we can kind of unpack that today. But really just been on a journey, both personal and business, that has constantly weaved together. And as I've done that, I've finally gotten to a place where I'm at today, which is full-time in my calling, helping other people unlock what I call limitless growth, both individually and as an organization.
Yeah, I mean, when we talked for the first time, we talked a lot about how your sobriety has stuck, and the reason that it stuck was helping others. And I love that it's the same philosophy for business as it is for you personally. Can you talk a little bit about that and why it's so important?
100%. So we can actually start at the bottom and work our way up. So, when I think about what is it that great companies do to unlock rapid growth, you had mentioned that. And rapid growth is definitely important, but continuous growth is even more important.
Yeah.
And the thing that companies do is that they become radical about their stakeholders, not to be confused with stockholders, not to be confused with executives. But when a company is radical about their customers, or unless it's members or clients or whatever, there's thumbs up. They're radical about how can we help those customers, and they're equally as radical as how they can help their colleagues and the people in their teams, and then equally as radical about helping their community. So when you think about that, the companies that have done really great things and continue to grow, at the heart of it, there's this lens. It's almost like an empathy lens for the stakeholder. When that is what all the different phases of the framework, and we'll dive into that in a minute, but all the different pieces of what makes a company really continue to be great and continue to grow is at the heart of it, that they're constantly suiting themselves to be of maximum usefulness to those stakeholders.
I love that. All right. So we did this lead into growth. Let's just go there because this is your sweet spot. This is your superpower. So what is maybe one or two things that companies that really grow well, what are they doing that makes them grow exponentially?
Okay. So in order to understand what growth is and how to get it, let's say growth is the hero, you have to understand the villain. And the villain is something that many of us are familiar with. And I call that villain the stagnation spiral. The stagnation spiral is made up of some things that many of us have been through many times. One of the most first things that lets you know if you're in a stagnation spiral as an organization is denial. So denial is a huge part of what keeps people in the stagnation spiral. The second thing is status quo. The third piece of it is silos. So as companies grow, what happens is most people think that continuous growth comes from success. But the truth is continuous growth comes from failure.
Yes, agreed.
And so what happens is that as you're more successful, you're like, let's organize this. And then all of a sudden you have these silos, and then you also have a lot of rigid processes because, you got to have your SOPs and all this.
Sure.
But as a result, those types of things, the denial, the silos, the status quo, the rigid processes, it continues to lead to disengagement. So those are the 5 sidekicks of this villain of the stagnation spiral. And the reason I want to talk about that first is because most of us can relate to one of those more than we can relate to what continuous growth is. But it's so important to understand that those are the two worlds, right?
Yeah.
And so the hero to the stagnation spiral is something that I call the infinity growth loop. And the infinity growth loop is what makes continuous growth possible, right? And what happens is that inside the loop is certain phases. And the reason why it's a loop is because it's getting into a mindset and creating an environment as an organization, call it your culture if you want, where we are constantly circling back and looking at failure as an opportunity. So one of the biggest things that keeps people in the spiral of stagnation versus the loop, one of the number one things that keeps them there is fear.
Yeah.
Fear is the bridge, right? And bravery is how you get there.
Yes.
So that's really the first step. If I'm like, all right, I'm tired of the stagnation spiral. I'm tired of the pain that I'm in from being in this space. That's when all of a sudden you're at a crossroads.
Yeah.
And that's the opportunity to go from the stagnation spiral into the loop, which takes a lot of bravery. It's not easy. And you really have to confront your fear of failure, and your fear of either losing something or not getting something.
Oh, so let's dig in a little bit on failure because, I led big teams and I certainly was led by some less than amazing leaders who really wouldn't hesitate to throw you under the bus if you failed at something that they delegated to you.
Sure.
Which is, by the way, one of the crappiest things you can do as a leader. If you delegate something, first of all, delegation is a power skill. So if you delegate something to someone, you own that, whatever it is you gave out. If they fail, it's your problem, not theirs, and you don't let them take the beating for it. But I think failure has to be celebrated. And it's a weird thing to say and people are uncomfortable doing it. But without those lessons, how do you grow? So if somebody screws up, okay, well, what aren't we going to do next time? All right, you got it. Let's do it. When someone believes in you after you've screwed up, goodness, so much
Hmm.
magic and inspiration can happen. And you've just solidified a level of trust that wasn't there before. So, what do you have to say about failure?
All right. Couple of things. You just said some pretty big stuff there. And the thing about delegation, let's just tackle that just real briefly and then we'll move on. But at
Mm.
the end of the day, whoever is in charge of a thing
Yep,
is now the leader.
that's
That
right.
means that if I delegate down, now they're the leader.
Hmm.
And so my role becomes how to serve them.
That's right.
They're the leader now. Whoever, like, that's, I think sometimes we think, oh, we're the leader, we're going to delegate all these things and then like let us know when you're done with it.
I'm gonna
No,
put my
the
hand there.
second we delegate it, now we become the servants.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's number one. But with failure, yeah, it is incredibly empowering for people. When I've interviewed a lot of my ex-employees over the years, and like really wanted like these people that would just run off a cliff for me,
Yeah.
blindfolded.
Yeah. Why?
Um,
Yeah.
and it's like, yeah, it's like, where did that come from? And every single one that I asked, they said, you believed in me when I didn't deserve it.
Yep.
And you stayed with me and you made me believe in myself in a way that I wasn't even capable of. And you never didn't roll your sleeves up and get in the dirt with us to help us
Yeah.
fix it.
Yeah.
And like, that's it. That's over 25 years. Like that's one critical thing there.
Yep.
It really, so when I was really faced from a business standpoint with this, because usually when you have failures in business, like things are going real bad, right? You're like the business is going under, or they have a mortgage crisis,
Sure.
or like
Sure.
we lost a huge client. But that's the more extreme situations. And at that point, it's too late.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about the people who are more in the middle. Like that's
Yeah.
why
Of
it's stagnation spiral as opposed to like, bankruptcy free fall
course.
or obsolescence free fall. And so we had to really face off on this when we got into tech. So I was in business for over a decade before I ever got into technology. And the way I got into tech was out of necessity, like most people did. And this was back in 2012 when you would hire a company to build a prototype. Well, anyway, I ended up buying that company. And then a day later, went to India and started another one. We'll get into that later. But the fact is that was a really painful process. And I'm going to tell you why. If you've ever, well, first of all, everybody has experienced tech. So you know what the word bugs
I
means,
mean,
right?
I spent
It's a,
23 years there, so yeah.
that's it. Yeah. So you know it even better. So the fact is that bugs is this thing that you have to change your relationship to. And when you're in the service business, every time there's an issue with a client, you fix it, you make it perfect, and then you're good.
That's
And
right.
you're always scared that that's going to somehow lose the relationship. Just constant fear of that, right? So when you get bugs, that goes on overload because all of a sudden, like, there's just bugs. Bugs are just part of the process. And so what we did to try to really flip it, not only from supporting the people that failed, but then celebrating it. And
Mm.
I don't recommend every company do this because obviously it's outside of policies, but we would take shots when somebody found a bug, we would take shots, and obviously mine were non-alcoholic. But the
Yeah.
fact is that was how we started really changing the way that we look at it. Because here's what we realized:
Well, you
that when
figured
you
it
look at,
out.
yes,
You got
well,
past
because
something
that's
tough.
the window. Yes, you're
Yes.
celebrating because now we have the window of how to make it that much better for who? The
That's right.
stakeholders.
Customer. Yeah.
And so when the loop is always coming through, and the culture that we created with the loop, so the phases of the loop go hand in hand with your second part. So we'll dive into those in a second, as far as like the authenticity, imagination, generosity.
Yes, that's where I'm going next.
Yeah. So, but just so you know, like it has to get to the point where you're actually celebrating change, you're celebrating failure because it's such a great opportunity. But we as leaders have to be the ones leading that charge. It's
Well,
not fair to leave it to all just the key contributors. We
well,
have to lead that charge, like, because eventually the good key contributors in the company will leave to find a leader that will allow for them to be in this loop versus just accepting the stagnation spiral.
yeah. First of all, you are the embodiment of my favorite leaders, which I am so excited that you're on the show because this is
Oh,
this is what I try to illustrate with this show is what good leadership looks and feels like, and you're giving just fantastic examples. But I want people to understand that when somebody says, "Oh, how's your job?" the answer that they're going to get is not about the company, is not about their mundane tasks. It is about the relationship they have with their manager. And if your manager is crap, they'll be like, it's fine, or I need a new one, or I don't know, I think I
It's
want to
just the
get out of
way,
this
yeah. Because so what
business
happens is,
entirely.
yeah, this is, and so here's how the whole current world of work gets away with it, and why my calling is to help build the new world of work.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That is what I get up every day to do, is to build the new world of work. And I'm finding people like yourself that are going to help us do it.
Yep.
It's an us thing. There's not going to be a leader in the new world of work. But the fact is that what is happening is that there's the stagnation spiral is one thing I didn't mention that makes it easy to spot, is like you're down in sales.
Yeah.
You're down in revenue. Like things are not going well. Okay. So all of these companies, they were at some point not down in revenue. And so what they do is they say, okay, we just need to do more
What
of
were
what
we
we did
doing there?
before.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yes, what we were doing before, like as if like continuous growth comes from doing the same thing, when we all know it comes from doing something new. I call that brute force.
Yep.
And brute force is what is crushing the workforce.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
crushing the workforce, and unfortunately, the leaders are not bad people. They just don't know what else to do, because, to be honest, what we're talking about on this show right now is scary. The,
yes.
and to some people, it might sound ridiculously radical, but for others, they've lived this. They know it's the truth.
Yeah.
And the fact is that this idea of brute force, it might be getting us to the quarterly goals. But
Well,
how many dead bodies are behind us?
the brute force piece is what creates the disengagement dilemma. And our mutual
Yes.
friend Matt Emerzian shared on his show, I think it's a $1 trillion problem. So
Yes.
if you are watching your team on Zoom, which so many of us leaders are, and you are seeing things like with the arms crossed, or
Or
you're
this.
seeing heads down, or you're seeing, someone playing Candy Crush, or whatever it is they're doing, you
That's
have
it.
lost them, and they are uninspired. There is no imagination. There is nothing that is motivating them to run to your side to perform. So,
Mhm.
best segue, let's talk about imagination and all the good things that make for good culture, because
Okay.
this is the cornerstone of performance. This is what drives results. So, go.
That's right. All right. So the phases of the loop, okay, are getting honest is the phase one, getting honest specifically around the problem.
Yeah.
So the authenticity and psychological safety are something that like just has to be present. But one of the most important things from a business case on authenticity is that everyone needs to be showing up as their authentic self, because sometimes, because there's a culture where masks are involved, the leader isn't even have a fair shot
Mhm.
at being able to help the person, because he is helping the person from their mask. So it's a bunch of just masks thinking, oh, this, and most of us have said, oh, well, that's just how it is at work. And then when I'm home, I'm a different person. And I lived like that for years.
Yeah.
It's
We all
where a
did.
lot of this came from, is that I eventually like broke.
Yep.
And so authenticity is about getting honest with each other, and then getting honest about the problem, and specifically like what we can and can't solve.
Hmm.
Right. So the phase one is about alignment around the problem, which requires authenticity and honesty
Yeah.
about where we're at. That is the first phase of this that has to be present if you're going to have a company that has continuous growth.
Hmm.
All right. And so
That's
it's
scary too, because Frankie, not every leader is willing to go there. And they think the second they take that mask off, oh God, I'm going to lose my power.
well,
I'm
because
going to lose my role. I'm
look,
going
I
to,
went
yeah.
through this. Look, for years, I went through this where I was like, am I supposed to be more of a hard boss on people? Like, am I missing something? I ask myself that question all the time.
Mhm.
And I never switched to it, but I always wondered, maybe I'm just not hard enough on them.
Well,
Because the default setting is like, oh yeah, just go harder on them, or like write them up, or take away their toys, or whatever it is,
mhm.
or fire them. Like that must be the solution. We just got the wrong person.
Well, I mean, for me, growing up in tech, I was the only woman on many, many, many teams. So when
Oh,
I became a leader, I thought the only way to lead was this bro style of leadership. And
Brute
oh shit,
force.
I don't have enough sports
Hustle
analogies.
harder, have more grit,
But like, I don't
put
have
your
enough
big boy pants
sports
on.
analogies to inspire my people because that's what they do. And it was so uninspired and it was so not me.
That's
And
so funny.
I
I never
just
use sports analogy. That must be why we like each other.
Oh God. Well, there's a difference. Like if you talk about someone who had a spinal cord injury and has like
Yeah,
rehabbed their
or
way back and
Rudy.
won a race, like that's amazing. Don't talk to
Mhm.
me about the play on the 30-yard line from the game I didn't watch last night. Like that's
Right.
not going
If
to
you want
get
to talk about
anything out of
Rudy,
me.
let's talk about Rudy, but that's
Yes,
fine. Yeah, I hear you.
exactly. Exactly. So sorry, back to you. I
No,
feel
no,
like
that's
I
right. That's right. So the first phase of the loop is about getting honest. And so because it's a loop, we're going to be coming back to that. And we're going to be coming back to that frequently. The
yeah.
second part of the loop is really important as well. So the first thing is about alignment, authenticity, getting honest about the problem as it relates to the stakeholders. The second also relates to the stakeholders, but it's about imagining a new solution. Now, the problem with imagination is that most people don't believe that they're imaginative. All right. But the fact is that every single person is imaginative at a genius level. And there's actually science to prove it, a lot of different science. And so one of the things I do with organizations is I help them, and in my keynotes, like spend a little bit of time of reminding them that imagination is not something that is learned.
Mm-mm.
It's actually unlearned. Right. And so there's this study I talk about from NASA where they actually tested 1,600 kids. They took the same test they had given to, you've probably seen it. They gave the same test they gave to the adults. Then this was to get their aptitude for that genius part of our brain and that divergent side of ourselves that, of course, was conditioned out of us. So we've been conditioned out of thinking that imagination was powerful. But even Einstein said that imagination is more powerful than knowledge.
Well, talk about the test because I know the test, but tell the
Okay,
audience
so
because I
real
think it's
quick,
really
the
cool.
test. So basically, back in the space race in the late '60s, NASA tapped a guy named George Land, and they wanted a test to be able to hire the brightest people that could make sure that they continually innovated to keep America as the superpower, right? And so they made this test, and the test was so simple that they gave it to children. It was 1,600 children. It was sample size of the U.S. And the wild part about this test was that 98% of them tested at the genius level of imagination. So they were so excited, they decided that they were going to make it a longitudinal test. So they tested the same 1,600 kids at 10 years old. And unfortunately, it was already at 30%. So in just 5 years, it went from 98 to 30. Now at 15 years old, they tested them again, and it was 12%. And then they decided to abandon the test.
Because it's
And
so sad.
yeah. And most people that talk about this research or this test, they're mostly like kind of throwing shade on schools,
Yeah,
which is not my
not right.
intention.
That's not
Right.
right.
It's not my intention by any means. But what I do know from this test is that there is conditioning that happens to us from a childhood that changes the way that we approach imagination and other things and our genius. So what's interesting about it is that the imagination component of this is so critical, but it's so much underappreciated because we have stuff to do. And if you can't measure it, it's not real. Right. And so everything becomes about engineering and it becomes about math and it becomes about science. And if I can't see it, then it's nothing. And so that type of thing was just conditioned into us, whether it was with school or adults or other people, it was conditioned. Now, some people even have it even worse because not only did they have conditioning, they also had trauma
Mm-hmm.
that separated them from that part of themselves that
Okay.
used to be that imaginative. So part of the opportunity is to just start creating space where I can show up with work activities that don't matter so much.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have to create that space where we can, and it's expensive because space is time. And so you have to celebrate this. And one of the things that I tell people all the time when you're in this loop, it's important to make sure that whatever decision we decide is not being decided in the same meeting as the ideas. I like to talk about it as like the brake and the accelerator, where
Mm-hmm.
if you push them both at the same time, they're both powerful, but like push them both at the same time, like your car's getting really messed up.
It's not gonna
Now,
do it.
but if you push them separate, they're amazing, but they have very different use cases. And so I always encourage people, try not to push both at the same time. go into these opportunities of like ideation and of trying to pull out this difficult thing from people that are in their day-to-day. This is not that easy of work to do. And don't try to make a decision in the same meeting that you're trying to have ideas in.
No,
That's
and
those simple things that so many people mess up. I used to do it all the time.
I think, at least it was my experience leading big teams, that when you could provide them with a safe space and that psychological safety is abundant, that is when the imagination comes. And we can't mistake creativity from imagination. I think a lot of people immediately think to
The
art
creative team.
and like, I'm not an
Yep.
artist, and like they forget that imagination is just ideas.
That's
It's just
right.
a different
It
way of
goes well
thinking.
beyond creativity, and it goes
Yeah.
and I think so many people are like, well, that's why we have a creative team, or that's why we have an innovation team. It's
No,
so if you're leaving it
everyone
to
needs,
them, you
yeah,
will absolutely find yourself in a world where the company as a group is left behind, and you
yeah.
see it over and over again. When you don't,
Everybody needs to be in that
everybody has to be a
space
part of it.
that they
Yes,
can
yes.
think differently. And
And
I had
part
a,
of it is because it brings out the whole person.
yes,
Like a big part of this. So I'm gonna tell you what the third loop is, and then I'm gonna get to
yes.
the fun part. Okay. So the third part of the loop is collaborating without boundaries, which is all about how do we turn the imagination into the ingenuity. I
Hmm.
call it imaginuity.
Hmm.
So companies just don't grow because one of three things happen. Either they don't even have the authenticity alignment part done.
Hmm.
And a lot of companies are dead on arrival there. Let's say you do have that. It's a psychologically safe place and it's, you're aligned on what you want to do, but you aren't creating the space for imagination. You're not really harnessing the collective on that. And let's say you do both of those. Where companies fail on this third piece is that if I'm not turning that make believe into a reality and have a mechanism for that, okay? Because what I've found is I've worked with hundreds of different companies and worked inside of a lot of companies, and there's a lot of initiatives out there, right? Send your email idea to this one, or come to this little workshop, or there's all these different things where it's the companies wants people to have ideas,
Hmm.
but the ideas stop coming because they feel like they go nowheres, or they don't even have an understanding of why their idea didn't go somewheres, and so that then they don't have as much buy-in to whoever's idea we did go with. But the companies that are really successful today and continue to grow are the ones that have a mechanism to turn the imagination into ingenuity. So that's a big component. And then in that third phase, we're collaborating. This is where the shots come in, right? Because this is where you're going to have failure,
Yes,
right? But it's not failure if it's just like the next experiment.
that's
We
right.
learn from it, and that's when the loop closes and circles back to getting honest. So
Well,
the
and
loop phases. Yeah, go ahead.
using the words, we're going to try new things. Not all of them are going to work, but we're going to celebrate when we
Most of
learn
them won't.
something.
Yeah, first of
And
all, nothing. We have they're all going to work.
yeah,
They're
I mean,
all
they're
going to
all
work.
going to provide some lesson.
Yes, yes,
And
but we have to create that value
yeah,
in the organization, and that's where you don't have to keep buying companies that have ideas and trying to bring them in, which is difficult. That's when you don't have to look outward for all this stuff that we
right.
need to be looking inward, because we don't need more teams. What we need to do is make sure that we engage with the people that we already have by creating an environment. So let's talk about this for a minute. So if you think about it as far as the continuous growth. So I had this moment the other day where I hit my head on the toilet and had a vision, right? And so you remember
Back
Back
to
to
the
the Future?
Future.
Have you seen that? Yeah, you've seen
Yes,
Back to
Back
the
to the Future.
Yeah,
Flux
so there's
capacitor.
probably some youngsters watching this and they don't know what we're talking about, but look it up, Google it, or ask ChatGPT. But in 1955, this guy, crazy, wild-eyed scientist, Doc Brown, hits his head on a toilet. He sees a vision for, I actually have one, so this is it right here.
The flux
For
capacitor.
the flux capacitor. And this
Yeah.
is what makes time travel possible. All right. So I want you to think of the continuous growth loop as what is making continuous growth possible. So just like the flux capacitor, the infinity growth loop makes continuous growth possible. Now, they both have the exact same problem. All right. So if you remember, Marty goes back to 1955 and he can't get back to 1985. And the reason he can't, if you remember, is because he didn't have the 1.21 gigawatts
Mhm.
that it takes to fuel this flux capacitor. So basically, without a huge amount of energy source that becomes continuous, this is worthless, even though it makes time travel possible. Like the framework that I just went over with you, the infinity growth loop, You've heard some versions of something like that. We've seen these frameworks, we've heard these frameworks, and yet for some reason, they're not continuous. Or maybe we try it once and then we stop. And so I've really done a lot of work on like why that happens.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I've come to realize is that just like this flux capacitor needs the 1.21 gigawatts, what fuels and makes the infinity growth loop possible is the collective genius of every single person in the organization. That's what makes the power happen. Okay. And so as I started to look at that, I was like, okay, wow. All right, this is the answer. And I've done this with my companies, but what does that look like for an organization? And this is where Love Your Weird comes in.
Oh, you took my segue. That was totally where I was going.
Okay, well, you can still segue, but
No.
but this is why the Love Your Weird piece is so critical, because most people are like, a couple things with the weird thing. It's, when you're a kid, okay, back when you had that 98% genius level of imagination, there's something really important back there that we often leave behind as adults, and we almost always leave behind as working adults, like in the office. Because, unless it's bring your kid to work day, that stuff is like not going to be helpful for what we're trying to accomplish this quarter. And so again, back to the brute force. And so when you think about Love Your Weird, couple things about it. First of all, you don't have to look weird to love your weird. That's number one. Number two, the weird I talk about, it is not just like quirky peculiarness. That's fine. You can do all that. But it's more about that weird kid we left behind. And there's different things about that. And fun fact, I don't know if you know this, but did we talk about where weird came from, the word?
No, I've seen it in your post, so I know.
Okay, okay. Well, if you haven't seen my post, something that most people don't know about is that the word weird originally, this is an old Britannica. It was originally a Old English word, and in the 1400s was when it was coined, but it was spelled differently. It was spelled W-Y-R-D. And the thing about this word is that it wasn't just spelled differently; it actually had a very different meaning. So Shakespeare and his weird sisters are the ones who made weird into what we know it is now. This peculiar, spooky, negative thing, whatever. And so a lot of people they look at Love Your Weird and they like it, but they're still nervous about it. They're kind of afraid of it. But this will put you at ease because I'm actually operating on the original word weird. And the only reason mine isn't spelled W-Y-R-D is because no one would know what the heck that word is.
What's wrong with them? It's an acronym.
Yeah, it's like wired. It's not a great spelling, but the Old English, right? So anyway, the meaning of it was quite powerful. And to be honest, I actually stumbled upon this by accident because I was already thinking in terms of the Love Your Weird before I found out this fun fact. And that is that the original word weird and the weird that we're talking about that's going to be the energy source for the continuous growth of an organization means the power to control or influence your fate, destiny, and my personal favorite, supernatural qualities. That's what the word weird means. That unique supernatural quality, i.e. genius, that each of us possessed. It's just so many times trapped along with that kid inside of us.
Yeah.
It's critical. And you can call it wholeheartedness, call it showing up fully engaged, call it whatever you want, but you will not be fully engaged. You will not love what you do if you aren't able to bring that kid with you. Like, so for example, when I was a kid, I stopped being what I'm about to tell you because people told me it was weird. Yes. And that's because I wanted to be a cowboy, an inventor, a astronaut, and a TV preacher all at once. And so I'm walking into school at 5 years old, 6 years old. I'm talking about how I want to build a time machine because I just saw Back to the Future. Yeah. I built 2 hoverboards. I built, jetpacks. Obviously, none of them really worked that good because I didn't have the ingenuity piece. But I never doubted that I could do that until people started to tell me that I couldn't.
Right. That's right. Yeah, I had a heaping dose of that from people in my life. So I will tell you that
it's a huge part.
The piece that, and this is so in my wheelhouse of everything you're saying, I called my team Mavericks and Hustlers. I wanted them to embrace the different, the odd, the forward thinking, and we created that safe space for us to try new things. And on the outside,
and they loved you.
Well, they loved me, but on the outside, people were like, I don't know what she is doing over there.
Yeah.
They're doing weird stuff.
That's right.
We were crushing it.
Yep.
And so people were watching and they're like, She's
Because you were together on it too. It wasn't like it wasn't just individual geniuses, it
no,
was the collective genius.
everybody. Yeah.
That is the
No, it was cool.
gold that we leave behind so many times. And part of it is again, so if we were conditioned out of us, if this imagination was conditioned out of us, then that means if we change the conditions again, then it will just come forth. And that's a big part of this loop that makes the loop self-fulfilling. You see, because it's the heart of the loop being about authenticity, imagination, and generosity and collaboration. That heart of it actually is the same type of environment that unlocks the genius.
Yeah.
While the genius then feeds it back in to the solution. And that's this infinity growth loop that makes it so powerful. And it's not just a theory. This is the stuff I did with my companies that had amazing results. And so this is something that over and over again I've seen in my own companies, in other organizations. You're talking about it, and we just met.
I know.
And that's why that's when you start to, it's not just about feeling what we're saying right now. If you're listening to this, feeling like this connects with you, it's also the fact that like when you never met someone and you have a totally different world and you come together and you know something the same, that's truth. That is a universal truth. And those are the things that I think are so important for us to lock into.
Well,
And
on a macro population perspective, outside of business, just in like a mano a mano, grab a cup of coffee, like I see you. And
yeah,
I think everyone is hungry for that today. I think we've lost so much of that, and it is so much easier to hide behind a keyboard and us versus them kind of mentality. It takes a lot more bravery to see someone and see something you have in common from someone you think you might not.
yeah.
So I love that. All right, so let me change gears a little bit.
All right, go ahead.
What inspires you?
So what inspires me is when I have the opportunity to truly help someone that is asking for help. When somebody believes that I have something that they would like or they need or want, and they ask for me to help them with that, and I have the pleasure and experience to get to do that, that's what keeps me going. So what makes my infinity growth loop going is that idea of how can today I be of maximum usefulness to the people that are around me? And that has become my new drug. You know, we didn't get into too much, but like I am a drug addict. I haven't picked up recreational drugs or drink or anything like that in over 16 years. But when you're a drug addict, you're always a drug addict, which means like I drank, I did drugs because I liked the effects of it.
Sure.
So I still need something that's going to give me those effects. And I'm so grateful to have become a drug alcoholic because it brought me back to what I had when I was a kid.
Yeah.
So one of the problems with as a kid, it was like this beautiful work we did with actual people that were in need and underprivileged and homeless. But the problem with that is that you're also poor. Okay. And the other problem is my dad got kicked out of his own shelter mission when I turned 18 by his own board because he wasn't going to take government money. So you put those two things together, right? This crazy like financial insecurity, anxiety with the fact that he got kicked out at the end of it. I'm like, I'm never doing that crap.
Not doing that. No.
And I ran away. And I was like, I have one objective. I'm going to make money. And that was the most terrible 10 years of my life when that was my objective. But it brought me to my knees and it brought me to a place where I finally had a true rock bottom turning point, which was the beginning of the journey we've discussed today. And I'm going to tell you, what most people don't realize is that getting sober is one thing. Staying sober is a totally different game. All right. And the game with staying sober is very straightforward. It's very simple. And it's exactly what also lights me up. So the only way to stay sober is if you're constantly helping somebody else stay sober. The only way to not go to bottom is to be with somebody else at their bottom. You don't want to go back to jail, then go to jail every Tuesday and tell your story. You don't want to go back to rehab, go to rehab every Wednesday and tell your story. Yeah. That's how this works. As I get more comfortable, as I get back into the stagnation spiral, eventually things will happen. I won't be in that space where I'm getting what I need. And so of course I'm going to go back to whatever addiction it was. And it doesn't have to be drugs or alcohol. It could be anything.
Well,
and it's crazy.
I love that you said that, because whenever I'm saying to anybody, you know, in order for you to feel better, if you're feeling really low, go do something for someone else. And it takes you out of yourself. And it's such a great example you use with your sobriety, but I really do believe that when you pay it forward, when you feel that, oh my God, I made a difference in someone's life, it really does change your perspective in a very rapid way.
It's crazy.
So let's go to another good question. What would you like your legacy to be?
Mm. I would like my legacy to be the longest list of people that I truly made an impact on their lives.
Mm,
And my list is not done, but I do have a list now, and it is by far the most rewarding, starting with obviously my wife and my 6 children. And a lot of the people, I mean, I've helped hundreds of people in their sobriety journey. And then of course, people that I've now helped through outside of that. And one little thing I wanted to mention from the last topic was that the disease is not addiction, is what I've realized. The disease is self.
mm,
And that's where my story might be about addiction and alcoholism is part of that. But the fact is that all of us have the same disease of self. And there's only one way to solve that disease, and that is by taking an antidote. And if the disease is self, the antidote is others.
mhm,
And that's what I want my legacy to be, is the way that I was of maximum usefulness to these people
mm.
and was able to really impact their lives. And when we do that, there's actually science, by the way. It's called the helper's high. They started studying this in the 80s. And the things that go off in our brain that's released from drugs and things like that, or gambling or whatever, that same stuff that we love, happens when you help someone unconditionally.
I love that.
That's why it's that this idea of helping others is not just a mission for me.
Mm.
It is somewhat pleasure seeking.
Oh, it becomes addicting for
Yes.
sure.
And if I'm going to be addicted to something, I want that to
Have
be
it
my
be
drug.
that.
And
That's
that and
fantastic.
I call it my limitless drug.
Yeah, I'll do that drug with you all day.
Okay,
Uh,
great. Now let's get high.
so what's next for Frankie?
Ooh. Okay, what's next for Frankie? I am continuing to expand the work I'm doing through books and speaking. But one of the big things that's next for me is helping found a movement called the New World of Work. And the New World of Work is going to be a collective of people that are on similar missions, but don't have to be the exact same mission. But the main thing is that they are also fully sold out to this idea of maximum usefulness to others, and aiming that specifically at the new religion, at least in America, which is capitalism.
Mhm.
And the God is money. That's the God that we pray to. And I believe that the new community, the church, if you will, is the way we come together at work.
Mhm.
And I believe that there's a new world of work coming, and it's going to be designed by people that really care about, yeah, we have to accomplish some things, right? We've got to accomplish sales. We've got to accomplish good profits and loss. We've got to accomplish low churn on employees. We've got to keep our customers loyal and all the things that we do, right? You have to do all that. But how can we do that without hundreds of dead bodies behind us?
Mhm.
That's the new world of work. And so that mission is just now being born. I'm blessed enough to have, a lot of other thought leaders out there fully sold out to their calling as well.
Yeah.
You would be one of those,
Put
and
me in, coach.
coming, yeah, coming together, because it won't be, it will be a movement, and
Yeah.
and eventually it might be experiences that people can come to, that are our own type of new events or things like that. And I'm really trying not to throw a full net over it, but I do know that that's something that is coming, and
I
I'm
feel it.
excited about that.
I totally feel that. And that's why I built this show. There are so many people, when I poll an audience and I say, who here has had a bad leader, 100% raise their hands. Who
Hmm.
here has had a great leader? Maybe
Yeah,
if
hit
you're
or miss.
really lucky,
Yeah,
maybe half. That's not enough. And so
no,
that's why I built this show. I wanted
I
people
love
to
it.
have great examples of what good leadership looks and feels like. So thank you for sharing so many of yours. You can't be what you can't see. And that's why I do this. So
I
thank
love
you
it.
for everything you're doing, because you are
Aw,
making an impact, you are making a dent, and we need more of that. So, Frankie, you've been an amazing guest. And guys, if you liked what you heard, please reach out to me, reach out to Frankie. We would love to help you with your leadership troubles.
For
There
sure.
are so many better ways to do this. And if you liked what you heard, please go out and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Go out and leave a 5-star review at Apple or Spotify. Thank you for listening. Go out and lead with heart. Have a great day. Are you ready to elevate your leadership style and create an exceptional workplace that stands out from the crowd? I'm here to introduce you to a game-changing resource that will transform the way you lead and shape your company culture. It's time to embrace the power of top-down culture. This practical guide empowers your leadership for lasting success, helping you create a workplace where everyone thrives. Get top-down culture today, and let's reshape the future of leadership together. Thanks for listening to this episode of Heartbeat for Hire. I hope you enjoyed what you heard. If you did, please subscribe to my YouTube channel or consider leaving a 5-star review and a great rating at Spotify or Apple. Thank you so much for your support. Have a great day.